It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Yes, you beautiful souls, welcome back. Of course, it's SABC3. We are live and it is your Expresso show. Now, before the break, we learned about how micro-property development initiative, BitProp, is creating entrepreneurs out of homeowners in Khayelitsha. And now these homeowners are they're essentially becoming property managers and landlords on top of it. And they're recognizing that a good tenant and client relationship is the key to a harmonious environment. Now, however, renting property can often leave room for some avoidable conflict.
Now we're calling on, once again, upon the legal guidance of our friend and expert in law, Director at Legalese.co.za, Eitan Stern, to answer the question, I want to rent property. So now what?
Good question. The BitProp thing's amazing.
Very, very amazing.
How are you doing this morning, Eitan?
I'm well.
Yeah,
I'm very
always good to have your expertise.
100%.
Nice for it to be called expertise.
Eitan, my beef with property,
Yes.
okay, in my years of renting
Yes.
property, why do I need to pay deposit? What is the function of a deposit? Particularly in Cape Town, it's very common to pay a 2-month deposit prior moving into the apartment.
As well as those admin fees on top of it, by the way. Like, what is that? All these hidden costs.
So look, everything that you find in rental is going to be a balance between the rights of the landlord, the property owner, and the rights of the tenant. Why do we pay a deposit? Well, a deposit is paid so that the landlord has some money as security in case something gets damaged. So if you break a window or damage something in the place, they've got something to fix it. They don't have to fight you for the money. Why do you pay the admin fee that's often charged on top of the deposits? But often there's a third party involved, an estate agent, and the estate agents charge a little bit extra in order to cover the contract fees. My personal opinion is that those could be, you could probably try to scratch those out in the lease. It's not really an agreement between the landlord and the tenant, but of course the estate agent might disagree. But if there's no estate agent in the picture, there really shouldn't be an admin fee. But the deposit, that's always going to be, they're going to want that.
So if we didn't know any better, then I wouldn't even question it. So I've really got a good tip there. Thank you so much. So I've got to ask you, like, when it comes to, obviously we've paid that deposit.
Yes.
And often it requires us to at least give some notice when we're leaving the place or plan to do something else. So what constitutes a good, fair amount of warning to say, okay, cool, let's say, is a month notice enough? And what constitutes that? Like, I mean, can I say on the 15th of March, here's my month notice, and I'm ready to leave by the next 15th of March? Does it have to be the start of calendar month? How does it work exactly?
So the best thing the best advice I can give on this question is that with most questions, 90% of the questions, the answer is going to be, what does it say in the contract? So you need to go and have a look at your lease agreement and see what your lease says. And your lease is going to say how much notice is needed. So your lease might say you need to give 30 days, which is any 30 days, the 15th to the 15th, or a calendar month, which is always going to be the first until the last day of the month. So if you give note, if it says a calendar month and you give note on the 15th, it's only effective from the 1st of the next month. So you need to look in your lease, and you also need to look what type of notice it needs. Does it need it in writing? Can it be a phone call? Generally, it's going to be in writing.
Read your lease, don't just sign that thing, please.
Read the lease and keep it. So because if any questions, a lot of the questions we get from renters, the answer is just read the lease, see what it says.
And it's very easy for us to briefly go through the release because we are in a quick rush to move into a different apartment. So we overlook so many things, such as the calendar month, some terms that you don't understand, etc. But one thing that I also would like to understand is, why is it very difficult for some landlords to give back your deposit once you've submitted, your month's notice in advance according to the lease agreement?
Okay, so landlords are supposed to give back they're supposed to keep the deposit and give it back once they've ensured everything is fixed. They are not allowed to keep it for longer than that. So they've got about 30 days, I think is the standard, to be able to say, look, we've checked the apartment and now we give them it back. If they're keeping it for longer, then they're stealing it, and that's not allowed. Often tenants want it earlier so they can pay the next deposit, but that wouldn't work because the landlords need to make sure that nothing's broken before they give it back. So once you move out, if it hasn't been returned after 30 days, then you need to go to your landlord and say, what's going on? This is now theft.
Beautiful stuff. Eitan Stern in the building. Of course, we will be back with some more info and more on this hot topic about I'm a homeowner, so now what? And we'll be finding out a little bit more about that. But let's find out what's happening with the boys in our social media question about what your favorite winter meal is.
More legalese expertise as we continue our discussion with lawyer and director at legalese.co.za, Eitan Stern, as he breaks down the legal ins and outs of renting property in our country. We've all been through nightmare situations, I think, as renters and rentees. But Eitan, thanks for breaking this down for us, because it can be a source of massive anxiety for on both sides of that fence, I would imagine, especially during these uncertain COVID times where people have been struggling to pay. So what's the deal here? What can actually happen if you don't pay your rent on time? Can you be evicted? And for that matter, what are the things that can lead to an actual eviction? What can force a landlord to say, okay, you're out?
What needs to have happened first?
Yeah.
Sure. So if you don't pay your rent, or if you don't do anything that it says in the lease agreement, then it's considered breach of contract. If you breach a contract is going to have a clause which says what happens if it's breached. And generally, you have a few days to rectify that. If you don't rectify that, then you can be evicted. So if you don't pay your rent, your landlord's going to say, you've got 5 days or 7 days to pay. If you don't pay after that, they're going to say, I'm sorry, you've breached it. We're now cancelling this contract, and then you need to be out.
So what is the process then of eviction? Because surely, do they say, you got 5 days and on Friday I'm coming, hi, get out?
Cool. So it's a great question and really important in South Africa, where there is a kind of history of abuse, and the law.
Thinking of the red ants.
And the law is there to kind of protect the weaker parties in a lot of situations. So no, a landlord can't just say, look, you're on the street. In order to evict someone, you have to go through a process. The process is relatively complex, potentially too complex. You have to go to the courts, you have to get a court order, and you have to essentially serve this order. And there's a couple of steps in order to evict someone. So you can't just say to someone, you're out by Friday, and then kick them out to the streets. Of course, on the flip side, that can be abused. Then people say, well, it's very hard to evict me, I'm not going to leave. But they need to remember, if you go through that process, you can be pinned with all the legal fees that it costs to kick you out. So there's definitely a balance. People shouldn't kick people out into the street without enough notice, but also people shouldn't stay in other people's houses without paying
for it. Then what can your landlord do in the instance that you actually haven't paid your rent and they obviously can't get you out on the streets? Can they turn off your lights and your water and do stuff like that and just randomly rock up to the house?
Guerrilla warfare,
do all sorts of things to make you so uncomfortable that you actually don't have to be evicted by them, you'll evict yourself.
So no, legally speaking, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to switch off the water, you're not allowed to switch off the rights. These would be a breach to someone's rights, essentially.
Living conditions.
Basic kind of living conditions. So you definitely can't do that. You have to go through the correct procedure. If someone doesn't pay, you give them notice, and you start the eviction process if they refuse to leave after that. But no, you can't just switch off the lights on people.
For that matter, outside of the kind of, obviously trying to force your hand space, how much leeway does a landlord have? Can they change track? Can they change the rent kind of power, maybe take away some of the property in the midst of your kind of lease?
So a great question. A landlord, so no, everything is governed by this lease agreement. So I'm going to keep stressing it. Whatever it says in the lease agreement, both parties are agreeing to. And a landlord and a tenant has to pay its rent and has to pay on time. In exchange, the landlord has to give what they said they would give. So can't make the property smaller, can't suddenly say, well, look, we need a bigger deposit, we up in the rent. It doesn't say they can do it in the lease agreement, they can't. Where the lease comes to an end, the terms can be changed. So the landlord can say, look, I'm only going to enter into a new lease with you if we agree to a higher rental. But what's agreed, what's on paper is on paper during that lease period.
The beauty of this entire conversation is that it's all really just rooted in this one master document, the lease document and the agreement, which you all have to really read and go through and make sure you understand up front, because in the absence of that, it's very tricky to be able to get yourself into some muddy waters there. So hopefully that's helped you a lot. Eitan, thank you so much for that.
Pleasure.